Now that we've seen a bird's eye view of the science of Nahw, and we've learned that the whole science, the whole study of Nahw revolves around essentially two things, right? Words and groups of words, right? i.e. sentences or phrases. But as is apparent, sentences are also made of words, right? Since sentences consist of words. So it's common sense for us to then assume that the most important discussion of the study of Nahw would be the individual words that make up the sentences, right? And as we've just learned, that there's three types of Arabic words: kalimat, asma, fa'al, and huruf, right? So you have nouns, verbs, and those words that are conjunction words that join the noun and the verbs in a sentence, right? So pair this up with initially what we talked about the three main elements of the study of Nahw, right? So since pretty much the entire study of Nahw revolves around the study of these individual kalimat, asma, af'al, and huruf, we begin by identifying, of course, in a sentence which word is indeed a noun or a verb or a harf, a conjunction word, right? So let's start with a noun, an ism in Arabic. Now the classical nuhat, they defined ism as like so: ما دل على معنى في نفسه غير مقترن بأحد الأزمنة الثلاثة. So a noun, an ism, is ma, what, dalla, points, ala, at, towards, dalla ala, points towards. So ma dalla ala, what points towards, ma'anan, a meaning, fi nafsihi, within itself, okay, within itself, غير مقترن, without being joined, bi ahadil azmina, without being joined with any one of the time frames, athalatha, the three time frames, i.e. the past, the present, the future. Okay, so it doesn't have any time frame attached to it. Okay, it's just a meaning, detached or isolated from any time frame, right? So essentially the definition has two parts. Number one, it talks about the meaning of the having a meaning within itself and having no time frame attached to it, right? So a noun essentially is a standalone word of complete meaning, which is self-sufficient and independent of other words to convey its meaning, right? So for example, look at the two examples I've given here. So Zaid would be an ism, a noun in Arabic, but the word min would not be a noun or an ism in Arabic. The reason being, when you say Zaid, the word Zaid is a standalone word. When I say Zaid, I can picture someone I know called Zaid, right? So it's a word with complete meaning. It is self-sufficient, right? The word Zaid would automatically bring the whole concept, or so the vision or a picture of this person Zaid in my head, right? And Zaid does not need any other words attached to it to convey the full meaning of this person Zaid, right? So it's a noun, okay? But the word min means from. If I say from, it's an incomplete meaning, right? What from? Where from? Right? Where to? So all of these pieces of information, because min cannot convey its full meaning, although it has some meaning, but it can't convey its full meaning without being attached to another word, right? So it's not a standalone word of complete meaning. It is not self-sufficient. It's not independent of other words. So by the first part of this definition, this word min would not be a noun, okay? It would be a harf. Now this part of the definition, i.e. being standalone, of complete meaning, being self-sufficient and independent of other words, this part of definition is common between asma and af'al. So this part of the definition would be true for a fi'l as well. Now the second part of the definition says غير مقترن, it is not joined with one of the three time frames, بأحد الأزمنة الثلاثة, the three time frames, one of the three time frames. Okay, So has no time frame attached to it. Okay, so a noun will not have any time frame attached to it. Now, if I say, for example, if I scroll down a bit, just one moment, right. So if I say something like let's compare Zaid again with something like dhahaba. Now, the word Zaid, of course, both words are true for the first part of the definition, because dhahaba and Zaid both have a complete meaning of the self-sufficient meaning, independent of other words. That's all true for both words. But if you look, Zaid conveys no time frame; it's just the name of a person, right? So this would be a noun, of course, right? This will be a noun. But the word dhahaba means he went, right? So when he went, right, it requires a time frame. He went in the past. The word itself, went, conveys you a time frame attached to the verb, this action that's been done in the past. Okay, so dhahaba would not be dhahaba would not be a noun. It will be a verb, but Zaid would be a noun because it fulfills both parts of the definition. Remember that all of this forms the big discussion that we are having on the first element of the study of Nahw, which is to identify the types of words based on their definitions and their salient identifiers. Okay, so this is what we are focusing on right now, the first element of the study of Nahw. I thought just to mention that just so that we are still on track, so we don't lose focus from that initial statement I made about the three main elements of the study of Nahw. It's very important that we keep our eyes fixed on that three-step process. Okay, so all of this is we are working our way up to that point where we can carry out those three steps, inshallah ta'ala. Okay. But since this is just a Nahw 101 course, we'll cover as much as we can in this of this level that will be easy for you to digest, inshallah ta'ala. All right. So now that we've covered the definition of a noun, let's look at some specific identifiers of a noun. These are the identifiers that you will not find in a verb, right, or a harf, for example. Okay. So the specific identifiers of asma. Okay. So one of the very first identifiers of asma in the Arabic language is having an al at the beginning. Okay, so for example, you have alhamdu. The word alhamdu is a noun because it has an al on it. Okay, the word al-kitabu is a noun. Right? Why is it a noun? Because it has an alif lam on it. Okay, and so on and so forth. The next example, the next identifier, apologies, for asma in the Arabic language is to have a tanween on a word. Right? For example, having this on double sound, on or an or an in sound. Right? Tanween, having a tanween. Okay, so something like this. So let's just use the same examples as hamdun. A fi'l cannot have this on and in sound. Okay, and use the same example as kitab, right? So kitabun. Okay, so your nouns can have this tanween. A verb will never have a tanween or an alif lam on it, right? These are your apparent identifiers, one of the most common ones. In fact, Ibn Hisham, in his book Qatr al-Nada, he mentions that he only mentions 3 main identifiers. He says there's only 3 main identifiers. The rest just follow. The rest just follow these two, right? So you have alif lam, and then you have the tanween, right? And only nouns can have these, and af'al will never have alif lam or tanween on it, right? So let's move on to the third identifier, which is to have a ya, or one of the huruf of nida, behind a noun, right? So for example, if I say ya Ahmed, right? So I'm calling someone, and you can only call someone who is a person or a noun or some, an entity, okay? And only nouns can be entities, okay? So ya Ahmedu, right? Sirb al-qata, right? Sirb al-qata, okay? So these are examples. Sirb al-qata is just the flock of birds, right? So is another way of calling someone. These are specific huruf that you use for calling upon someone, right? Ya Ahmed, ya sirb al-qata, ya Fatima, so on and so forth. Fatima, all right? Ya Ahmedu, sirb al-qata, and then ya Fatimatu. Okay, so alif lam in the beginning, tanween at the end, or having one of the huruf of nida at the beginning of a noun. Okay, number 4 would be to have a ta marbuta at the end of this round ta. Ta marbuta is this round ta, right? So for example, if I have a word such as muslima, muslimatun, right, muslima, and only a noun would have this ta at the end of it, okay? Only a noun would have it. Now if I say muallima, muallimatun, okay? So alif lam in the beginning, tanween at the end, huruf nida at the start, or having the ta at the end of the word, right? So these are your specific identifiers of isma, and you can add to this list having harf jar, right? Harf jar behind a noun, and only nouns can have huruf jarra behind them, right? So for example, you say wallahi, right? Wallahi, the waw here is harf jar. It gives the noun a kasra, right? A jar, right? Normally a kasra, but it can the jar can be given by other harakat as well. And that is sort of given by the type of noun that you're talking about. Okay, so for example, let's use another example. Wallahi, you can say dhahabtu bi Zaydin, I went with Zayd, so you can say bi Zaydin, right? So the ba here is a harf jar, right? So you can say, for example, let's use lam, for example. Let's say هذه الهدية لعمر. This gift is for Umar. هذه الهدية, right? الهدية لعمر. Now lam is a harf jar and umara is majroor, right? So any noun that comes after any harf jar, lam in this case, ba in this case, and wa in this case, and there's a list of 17 of these, okay? Any word that comes after these has to be a noun, right? Now something similar to harf jar is being mudaf, right? Mudaf is a relationship of possession between two words, right? So if I say kitabu Zaydin, right? Kitabu Zaydin. Only a noun can be prescribed or associated to another noun. Something of something, right? That's something that it belongs to someone can only be a noun, of course, right? So kitabu Zaydin, this word kitabu is a noun here. Why? Because it is mudaf. It is in possession of Zayd. I can say, for example, قلم علي, right? قلم علي. So the pen of Ali. Now this pen is a noun. Why? Because it is mudaf, right? It's possessed by Ali. So these are some of your alamat, or the identifiers of asma that you can see in the words, right? These are apparent. There's one identifier, and that is the most important of all of these identifiers, but that is it is not an identifier that you see in the word itself. It is a conceptual identifier of a noun. Okay. Now, it is called being musnad ilay. Okay, musnad ilay. Just put these columns after each of these, so that's easier to understand. Okay, musnad ilay. So, and only a noun can be musnad ilay. What we mean by musnad ilay is the noun has the potential of being the subject of a sentence, right? If I say something like Zaydun qa'imun, other than the fact that Zaydun has a tanween on it, and for example, it's a name of a person, that gives it away, sort of, right? It's a noun. But if we just place it aside for a few seconds and assume that we don't know what Zayd is, we can tell that this is a noun based on the fact that you are talking about this person and you're saying that he is standing. Qa'im, standing. Okay, so when you formulate a sentence, the subject of the sentence has to be a noun, right? That is the thing that you're talking about. This is the piece of sentence that the rest of the sentence is giving information about, right? So Zayd, what about Zayd? Well, he's standing, right? So this act of standing is being associated, or is being attributed to this person, Zayd. Okay. Now this becomes even more important in the example of the pronouns attached with the verbs, and if you do not have this idea of musnad ilay, it will be very difficult to identify these pronouns as nouns, because it's just a letter on its own. For example, if I say darabtu, okay, darabtu. This word darabtu here, let's change the color for this. Okay, this word darabtu, we're talking about this letter at the end, tu. If we did not have this concept of being a noun being musnad ilay, it would be very difficult for us to identify this tu as a noun. Because there's no al on it, there's no tanween, there's no ya behind it, there's no ta on this ta marbuta, this round ta, it has no harf jar behind it, it's not mudaf, right? So all of these alamat, these identifiers, they fail for this particular type of word, right? For these particular type of pronouns. So here, this tu is a dhamir, it's a pronoun, okay? So if it wasn't for the idea that this whole action is being attributed to this person, tu, right? It would be impossible for us to tell that this tu is a noun. What this means is, darab tu, I hit. So this action of hitting is being associated with this person, or is being attributed to this person, tu, i.e. I, right? Ana. So this tu stands for the pronoun I here in this verb. Okay, and this tu is a noun. Why? Because I am the person who hit, right? So I hit. That I is a subject of this sentence, and the subject has to be a noun. And I, of course, is talking about myself. I am a person, aren't I? Right? A person who speaks, I, you. All of these pronouns are used for entities, nouns. So therefore, the subject of the sentence, i.e. the musnad ilay of the sentence, has to be a noun as well. And this is, ulama say, this is the most powerful of the identifiers. If you can conceptually understand which word forms the subject of the sentence, i.e. the main pivot of the sentence, the rest of the information revolves around that pivot. if you can identify conceptually what the pivot of the sentence, i.e. the subject of the sentence is, you have essentially identified the noun. And if it's a funny type of word, which doesn't have any of these other alamat, which doesn't have an al or tanween or a ya or a ta marbuta or a harf jar, or and it's not a mudaf, but all of this fails, this would still stand, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, right? So these are your specific identifiers of a noun. And so now that you've seen that you have a definition of a noun that you've covered, that a definition of a noun said that it has to be completely sufficient, self-sufficient and independent of other words, and it has to have no time frame attached to it, right? So you would know a word to be a noun when it fulfills this definition, or it fulfills one of these criteria, like it has one of these identifiers next to it. Normally, you will just see a word and it will have an al on it, and you will be like, you know what, it's a noun. That's it, done deal. But for some other words, it's difficult because there are some words that you'll come across later on, which do not, which you can't sort of classify as nouns unless you knew the definition of noun, right? So both these things are important. So the same pattern, the way we've studied nouns here, we will apply the same pattern to the study of af'al, the verbs, right? So we will begin by defining what a verb is in the terminology of the nuhat, the experts of Nahw, and the specific identifiers of af'al, inshallah. The definition of the verb or the fi'l in Arabic is pretty similar to the definition of noun or ism that you've just come across. So if you noticed, or if you did try and sort of commit this to memory, you would notice that both definitions have this initial bit of the definition to be exactly the same, right? For example, if you scroll up here, you would come across this. So, ما دل على معنى في نفسه, ما دل على معنى في نفسه, and then you find the same thing here for verb, ما دل على معنى في نفسه, because both words are unanimous in this part of the definition, that they both must be standalone words of complete meaning, which are self-sufficient and independent of other words. Okay, so they must point. Ma, verb is also a word that points. Dalla ala points towards ma'nan, a meaning fi nafsihi, within itself. Okay, it doesn't require any other words to elaborate that meaning. It has a complete meaning of its own. Right, so both words are attached. Both words are defined. The fi'l and ism are defined with this initial definition, the initial part of this definition, like each other. And then the ending, بِأَحَدِ الْأَزْمِنَةِ الثَّلَاثَةِ, right, is the same in both definitions as well. بِأَحَدِ الْأَزْمِنَةِ الثَّلَاثَةِ, okay, with one of the three time frames, i.e. present, past, or future, past, present, or future. The difference, the place where it differs, is this midpoint. Okay, for example, let me just get this colored out. Okay, so here noun says it is غير مقترن, right? This meaning of the word, it is not attached to one of the three time frames, but in the verb you can see how it says مقترن. It is attached with one of the three time frames. That is the only difference between the two definitions. Okay, both asma and af'al, the nouns and verbs in the Arabic language, in the Arabic kalimat, both point towards a complete meaning within themselves. But where they differ is that the nouns, the asma, they do not have any time frame attached to them, whereas the verbs do. Okay, so the definition of the verb involves a standalone word of complete meaning, which is self-sufficient and independent of other words, right? Okay, and it does have a time frame attached to it. So both definitions have two components, the definitions of the nouns and the af'al, right? The first part is exactly the same in both definitions, Where it differs is the second part, where the nouns do not have a time frame attached to it, the verbs do. Okay, so now that we've established the definition of the verb and how we can see how it differs with the definition of a noun, let's talk about the specific identifiers of af'al in the Arabic language. Okay, so you have some identifiers that occur in the beginning. So let's rephrase it like so. Let's go on the right side, left side. So you have some identifiers which occur at beginning, okay, some in the middle, and then some in the some towards the end. Or you have these conceptual identifiers, okay. So one of the first identifiers that appears at the beginning of a verb is this word qad. Okay, this qad. Qad is a harf. It is used for certainty, to provide some level of certainty to a verb when there is a lack thereof. So, for example, this would be used like so. You'd say qad daraba. Okay, qad daraba. He definitely hit. Right, he did hit. He hit and he definitely hit. Right, so there's a level of a certainty, trying to make give a sort of a surety to the action having been performed. So qad daraba, qad nasara, he did help. Right, but so there's different uses of qad. Well, inshallah, we'll cover them more in the actual stories as well when we read other literature, but also inshallah somewhat in this one-on-one series, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Right, so you can have a qad behind a verb, and only a verb would have a qad behind it. No, not a noun. Right, a noun can never have a qad behind. Okay. The next thing would be having a scene. Apologize for that terrible scene. We'll just replace that with a better one. So if I say scene, right, that looks much nicer. So scene, having a scene behind a verb. Okay, so having a scene behind a word. Let me use an example. So say sa yadribu. He will hit. Sa yadribu. Sayansuru. Sa yansuru. Okay, sa yansuru. So having a qad behind a verb, having a scene behind a verb, having a sawfa, right? Having this word sawfa, it is also a harf. It's not. This is the sawfa is also a harf. When you see this sawfa word appear behind a verb, so just replace the scene with the sawfa. Sawfa yadrib. Sawfa yadribu. Sawfa yansuru. Sawfa yansuru. Right, only verbs will have sawfa behind. So qad, verily he hit, or he did hit, indeed he hit. Sa yadrib, he will hit in the near future, and sawfa yadribu, he will hit in a somewhat distant future. Okay, so another thing that you can have at the beginning, and another identifier that you can have at the beginning of a verb is one of the jawazim, like having a lam, for example, right? From one of the jawazim. These are the agents or the awamil on of af'al, of the verbs, that make the af'al lose its case ending, so it will go silent or without a a haraka. It'll have a sukoon, right? So the same example as above. You can replace this sawfa with lam. So you'd say lam yadrib. He has not hit. Lam yadrib. But in this case, the ba would be silent. Sukoon. We'll have a sukoon. Lam yadrib. Lam yansur. Lam yansur. Okay, so having lam behind a verb. Lam. One of the other jawazim is lamma, so you can replace this lam with lamma. Okay, it can be replaced with lamma, right? And then you can replace this with lam lam al-amr, right? It's used for giving a command, right? Fal yadrib, he must hit, he should hit, right? For example, you would say fal yadrib. It's imperative that he hits, right? So it's like a command in the third person. Fal yadrib, lam amr, right? And then la'u nahi, la'u and nahi, right? To give a negative command, right? That la yadrib, he must not hit, right? La yadrib, la yadrib. It's the case ending. You see how the ba is silent in all of these. So these are your identifiers that appear behind a verb, and then you can have another class of identifiers which is denoted by lan, but these are all nawasib of the af'al that make the fi'l have this fatha at the end normally, or it can lose its noon, right? For example, in these same examples, you would say lan, so it's a lan, right? Lan yadriba, lan yadriba, right? Lan yansura, he will never hit. Lan yadriba, he will never hit. Lan yansura, lan yansura, right? I mean, you can pay attention to the case endings, how the ones with sin and sofa do not affect the case ending of the verb, but lam and lan do. But anyway, inshallah, we'll cover this concept of these huruf that act and the huruf that do not act on the words. So they some of them are agents of inflection, and some of them are not. Okay, so that inshallah we'll cover that later. But for now, what's important is for us to understand that these are the five types of identifiers that appear before the verb or the beginning of the verb. And it's quite easy for you to identify a verb using this piece of information. Okay. Then you have the second class of identifiers of af'al, which appear at the ending, right? This is the ending. You see these identifiers towards the end. Okay. So then one of the first identifiers of this type, right, would be the ta of femininity, right? It's called ta'nith. It's used to denote a third person she. Okay, a third person she in the singular. So ta'nith. I'll give example. So ta'nith as-sakina. Okay, sakina. An example of this would be ضربت, she hit. ضربت. ضربت. You see this ta over here is silent, right? It's silent. It only has sukoon. It has no vowel on it. It has no haraka on it, right? So this is essentially a pronoun. But you'd only see this kind of ta, silent ta, attached to a verb, right? It can never happen on a noun. As we noticed, on the in the asma, the endings are either with tanween, right? Or you have this alif lam at the beginning, okay? So you would never have a silent letter like so in a noun, especially not this, right? So this ta, tani sakin, this specific ta, right, will be an identifier of a verb. So darabat, let me give some more examples. Nasarat, nasarat, right? Akramat, akramat. Darabat, she hit. Nasarat, she helped. Akramat, she bestowed. Right, and then you can say, for example, let's take alimat, she knew, she came to know. Alimat, right? Or ta'allamat, she learned. Ta'allamat. Inshallah, we'll learn some bits of what's the difference between alimat and ta'allamat in the Sarf series, ta'ala. So you see how all of these verbs end with this ta, right, with sukoon. So this is called ta tani sakina, which denotes a third person she in the singular, okay? The second identifier towards the ending of a verb is the pronouns, the dhamir, the pronoun for the fa'il, right? Dhamir, which is for the fa'il, i.e. it's marfu'. It denotes a fa'il. Anything that's marfu', it denotes a fa'il, the doer of the verb. The pronoun of the doer of the verb that is attached to the muttasil, which is attached, muttasil, attached to the verb, right? Example of this would be using the same verbs as above, right? Darabta, darabta, nasarta. Darabta, you hit. Nasarta, you helped. Akramta, akramta, you bestowed. Alimta, you came to know. And then ta'allamta, you learned. Okay? Ta'allamta, right? Right, ta'allamta. Okay, these are the two types of endings. So the first one, it's specific to the third person she in the singular, third person she, right? The second pronoun, the second case, it encapsulates all the other pronouns apart from the third person he and she. Okay, so these dhama'ir, the ta, right? For example, if we count all the dhama'ir from the first one, will be the for example, if I just write this over here, it makes more sense, inshallah. So if I say, and we'll cover more of this in the sarf, inshallah. But if it's daraba, right? Daraba, darabu. Okay, darabu, right? And then darabat, i.e. this word over here, darabu, darabat, darabu, daraba, darabu, darabat, darabatta, right? Darabna, darabna. Okay, right? So apart from this one and this one, all of them have these pronouns, right? So you have the alif here, you have the waw here, right? You have this alif again, and then you have this noon. Okay, so all of these are pronouns which are marfu'. They denote a fa'il, the doer of these actions, and it is and as you can see, it is muttasil, it is attached to the verb, right? So these are three things that you notice at the end of a verb, and the rest of the pronouns of the same verb would be ta, tuma, tum, ti, tuma, and then tunna. So it will be darabata, darabta, darabtuma, darabtum, darabti, darabtuma, darabtunna. Right? And then darabtu, and then darabna. Okay? So you see any of these pronouns attached to a verb will denote a verb. Has to be this type of thing has to be a verb. Okay? These dama'ir only appear on a verb, inshallah ta'ala. The third type of ending that you would normally have on a verb is having a noon mushaddad or noon mukhaffaf, right? It's called noon muthaqqala, right? It's noon ta'keed thaqila or noon ta'keed khafifa, right? So this is known for ta'keed, right? For putting some assurance in speech, right? It's giving force to speech. Okay, so an example would be say if I command you idrib, hit, right? But to give it more force, I can convert this to, right, idribanna, idribanna, right? idribanna zaydan, hit Zayd, for example, right? Or unsuranna, unsur, help. Okay, unsur Zaydan, or unsuranna Zaydan, unsuranna Zaydan, help Zayd, right? With a bit of force to it, right? So these are your case and specific identifiers to af'al, right? Only these nun saqila with the nun shadda and nun sakin, right? This can only appear on a verb, right? So this is a very key identifier for a verb in your speech, in your Arabic text, right? So make sure that you pay attention to these identifiers at the beginning of verbs. So قد, seen, like سيضرب, قد ضرب, سوف يضرب, سوف ينصر, lam, or any of these other lam, lamma, lam al-amr, la al-nahi, right? So lam yadrib, lam yansur, lamma yansur, right? Li yansur, la yansur, lan at the beginning, right? Lan yadriba, lan yansura, and what skipped my mind initially was, so you have an, lan, kay, and idhan, right? So these are the four nawasib of the fi'l, right? They put this fatha on top of it. So, and if you see any of these at the beginning of a verb, it has to be a word, it has to be a verb, okay? And likewise, when you see one of these at the ending of a verb, a word has to be a verb, inshallah. And then last but not the least, we'll talk about the conceptual identifier. As was the case with noun, there's a conceptual identifier, okay, with the af'al as well. The conceptual identifier is for the fi'l to be a musnad, la musnad ilay. It can, for a word to be a fi'l, you have to see in a sentence that it has the potential of being a musnad, but not musnad ilay, right? Musnad, that being musnad is true for it, and being musnad ilay will be false for that word. Okay, I'll give you an example. So take the same example as we took for the asma. So Zaydun qa'im. Now we're saying Zayd is standing, okay? Now, in this speech, Zayd is your musnad ilay because you're talking about Zayd, you're giving information about Zayd, right? And Qaim is the information that you're giving about Zayd, right? So this is the musnad. Okay. Now, this word Qaim, right, has the potential of becoming a musnad ilay. If I was to say, for example, change this other way around. So if I say al-qa'imu, by making the qaim the subject of the word of the sentence, and then say al-qa'imu Zaydun. Alright? So in this case, al-qa'im now becomes the musnad ilay. Musnad ilay. But and now Zayd is a musnad, okay? But a verb can never be turned into a musnad ilay, okay? So if I say, if I use the example of a sentence, say Zaydun yaqumu, right? Zayd will stand, or Zayd is standing, right? In this case, does not matter what I do with this word yaqumu, it will always be a musnad. It will always be an information for this person, Zayd, which is musnad ilay. You'd always talk about Zayd using the verb of the same word. Okay, so you can have the root word turn into a noun, and then that noun can be used in different ways. But if you use a verb, if you choose that root word in a verb form, then that word will never be able to become the subject of the sentence. It will never be able to become the musnad ilay of the sentence, right? Hence this rule, right? The conceptual identifier of a verb is that it can never even have the potential of becoming the subject of the sentence, right? The musnad ilay of the sentence, okay? Only a noun has a potential of that. Okay, so inshallah, that's the ending of our definition and the specific identifiers of af'al. So you can see as a little summary of this, there's no big difference between the definition of a noun and a verb, apart from the fact that the nouns do not have a time frame attached to them. Okay, but the verbs do. Okay. And we've seen how the identifiers of asma have alif, lam, and tanween, and these ones. And you can see none of these are shared by a verb, right? The identifiers of af'al are completely different. Okay, so these are specific identifiers to af'al and asma, right? So when you are reading, the first step that you take before you can even understand anything is to identify things if they're nouns or verbs, so that you can give them their proper translation. You can never give a verb the translation of a noun or the meaning of a noun, can you? Right? So a Zayd would never be equivalent to he went or he ate or he slept. Right? The Zayd would just be the name of the person. Okay, so when you can identify a word in a sentence, you can translate it properly, you can understand it properly, which is why it's so important as a first step to identify your words as nouns, verbs, and huruf, right? So asma, fa'alan, huruf, inshallah ta'ala. Now, before we end this section, the huruf are the easiest to remember, right? The conjugation words. I.e. huruf, okay? The thing with these huruf is, their definition states that it has no meaning of its own, has no independent meaning, i.e. it's dependent on other words to give its meaning, has no independent meaning. Okay, that's the easiest thing to remember. It has no independent meaning of its own. And secondly, has no time frame attached to it. Okay, Right. Okay. So that's it. And the identifiers for huruf essentially don't exist because a word is a harf if it does not have. So we reason by contradiction. A word is a harf, right? A word is a harf if it does not have the identifiers of a noun or a verb. If a word does not have an identifier that can identify it to be a verb specifically, or a noun to be or a noun specifically, then that word has to be a harf, right? So if I was to just word it out quickly, the specific, oopsie daisies, the specific identifier for huruf is simple, right? It does not have let me rephrase this, it'll be easier for us to learn it that way. So the specific identifier for huruf is that it cannot be classed as a fi'l or an ism, okay? That's a specific identifier. The reason why it can't be classed is because it doesn't have any independent identification mechanisms to it. Okay, so another way to phrase this would be is to that it is void of the identifiers of af'al and asma. It's simple as, right? So the discussion is lengthier for the nouns and the verbs, but for huruf it's pretty similar. It's pretty simple. Sorry, it's pretty simple. It has no independent meaning of its own. It has to join with other words to convey its full meaning, and it has no time frame attached to it. And the way you identify it is that it can't be identified as a fi'l or an ism. A word that can't be identified as a fi'l or an ism has to be a harf. Okay? And that's it, inshallah. It's easy, not difficult at all.